The evening sun was falling behind the hills of Haenam 7, when the sky broke open with the sound of engines. Taeho was kneeling in his garden, pulling weeds from the soil with his bare hands. He had been a captain once. He had commanded warships and led men into battle. But that was years ago. Now he grew vegetables and lived alone on a quiet farming planet at the edge of human space. He liked the silence. He had earned it. The ship that came down was not human. It was long and dark, shaped like a blade, and it landed in the open field behind his house without permission or warning. The ground shook under its weight. Dust rose in thick clouds. Taeho stood slowly, wiping the dirt from his hands, and watched as a ramp lowered from the belly of the ship. 3 figures walked out. They were Vakari, tall, broad, covered in layered black armor that looked like the shell of some deep-sea creature. Their skin was dark gray, their eyes small and sharp. The one in front was clearly the leader. He had gold markings on his chestplate and walked with the slow confidence of someone who had never been told no. "Captain Taeho of the United Earth Defense Command," the leader said. His voice was deep and carried a strange echo, as if 2 voices were speaking at once. "We come in respect. We come with honor." Taeho said nothing. He just looked at them. The Vakari leader smiled, or did something close to it. He raised one hand and made a gesture. 2 soldiers behind him carried forward a long metal pod, sealed with glowing blue locks. They set it on the ground between them, like an offering. "A gift," the leader said. "From the Vakari Dominion to a warrior of great name. We have heard of your deeds. We wish to show friendship between our peoples." Taeho looked at the pod. It was about the size of a person. His stomach turned, though he did not yet know why. "Open it," the Vakari said. Taeho walked forward. He pressed the release mechanism on the side. The locks hissed. The top of the pod slid open with a soft click, and cold air rose from inside like breath in winter. Inside was a girl. She was not human, but she was close enough to make Taeho's blood go cold. Her skin was pale silver, almost white, and her hair was long and dark, tangled and dirty. Her ears were slightly pointed, her wrists were thin, and around them were deep marks, red and raw, from restraints that had been removed only recently. She was wearing a torn gray garment that barely covered her. She was unconscious, and she looked like she had not eaten in days. Taeho stared at her for a long time. "She is Lirathi," the Vakari leader said behind him, his tone casual, even proud. "A tribute species, young, healthy, and well-trained. She will serve you however you wish. A fitting companion for a man of your standing." Taeho did not turn around right away. He kept looking at the girl. He noticed the bruises on her arms. He noticed how thin her fingers were. He noticed the faint trembling of her chest as she breathed. Shallow, uneven, the breathing of someone who had learned to stay small and quiet, even in sleep. He had seen breathing like that before, in prisoners of war, in people who had been broken. When Taeho finally turned to face the Vakari, his face was completely still. There was no anger on it, no shock, just a flatness that anyone who had served under him would have recognized immediately. It was the face he wore right before he gave an order that would end someone. "Get off my land," Taeho said. The Vakari leader blinked. "I do not understand. This is a gift of—" "I said get off my land." The leader's expression shifted, a flash of confusion, then amusement. He looked at the other 2 soldiers, and something passed between them, a look that said, "These humans are strange but small, and this one is no threat." "Very well," the leader said slowly. "We will leave the gift. Perhaps you need time to appreciate it." "Take your ship," Taeho said, his voice dropping lower, "and leave. Now." The Vakari turned and walked back up the ramp. The ship's engines roared to life. Within minutes, it lifted off the ground and disappeared into the darkening sky, leaving nothing behind but flattened grass and the pod. And the girl. Taeho knelt beside the pod. He removed his jacket and laid it gently over her body. Then he reached in and lifted her out. She weighed almost nothing. Her head fell against his shoulder, and even unconscious, her body flinched at his touch, a reflex, automatic, trained into her by pain. He carried her inside his house and laid her on his bed. He found clean cloth and began to carefully clean the wounds on her wrists. He worked in silence for nearly an hour. She woke while he was wrapping her left hand. Her eyes opened, wide, glowing faintly, the color of pale moonlight. And the moment she saw him, she screamed. It was not a loud scream. It was the kind of scream that comes from someone who has learned that loud screams make things worse. A choked, broken sound. She pulled away from him and pressed herself into the corner of the bed, making herself as small as possible, her arms raised to protect her face. Taeho did not move. He stayed exactly where he was, kneeling on the floor, his hands open and empty. "I am not going to hurt you," he said quietly. She did not understand his words, but something in his voice, or maybe in the fact that he did not come closer, made her pause. She watched him with those wide, glowing eyes, her whole body shaking. He pointed to himself. "Taeho," he said. She said nothing. She just watched him. He pointed to the water, then to the bandage on her wrist, then to her. He mimed drinking. He moved slowly, like a man approaching a wounded animal. After a long moment, she lowered her arms, just slightly. He poured water into a cup and set it on the edge of the bed. Then he stood up and walked to the far side of the room, giving her space. She watched him the entire time. Then, slowly, carefully, she reached for the cup and drank. That night, Taeho sat outside on his porch with his old military communicator in his hand. The stars above Haenam 7 were thick and bright, the kind of sky that usually gave him peace. Tonight, it gave him nothing. He activated the secure channel and waited. The signal bounced across relay stations, through deep space, until it reached Seoul Orbital Station in Earth's orbit. The screen flickered, and a familiar face appeared. Soren, older now, with gray at his temples, and the heavy eyes of a man who slept too little. "Taeho?" Soren said, surprised. "It has been months. What is—" "They sent me a slave, Soren." Soren went quiet. "A girl," Taeho continued. His voice was steady, but his hand holding the communicator was not. "A child. The Vakari sent her to me like a bottle of wine. She has marks on her wrists. She cannot stop shaking." Soren's face changed. The surprise left, and something harder took its place. "You need to bring this to the council," Taeho said. "Now, tonight. Because if you do not, I will fly to their homeworld myself and show them what a gift from humanity looks like." Soren nodded slowly. "Send me everything. I will wake the chairman." Taeho ended the call and looked up at the sky again. Somewhere out there, a species had looked at a frightened girl and called her a gift. And they had sent her to the wrong man. Nari arrived on Haenam 7 2 days later. She came on a fast transport from the nearest human station, carrying a medical bag and the kind of quiet anger that ran in their family. She was a field medic, had been one for 12 years, and she had treated burns, broken bones, and battlefield wounds without flinching. But when she saw the girl sitting in the corner of Taeho's bedroom, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the floor with empty eyes, Nari had to step out of the room and press her hand over her mouth for a long moment before she could go back in. "Her name," Nari whispered to Taeho in the kitchen. "Do we know her name?" "She will not speak," Taeho said. "She understands some things now. I have been using the translation software, but she does not talk. She barely eats." Nari looked back toward the bedroom door. How old is she? I do not know. Young. Too young for what they did to her. Nari spent the next 3 days at the house. She did not rush. She did not push. She sat in the room with the girl and did small, quiet things. Folded cloth, prepared food, hummed old songs their mother used to sing. She left plates of warm rice and soup near the bed and walked away. She never reached for the girl. She never raised her voice. On the 3rd morning, the girl spoke for the first time. The translation device on Nari's wrist caught it. A whisper. Barely a breath. Yuna. Nari looked at her. The girl pointed to herself and said it again. Yuna. Nari smiled gently and pointed to herself. Nari. Something shifted in Yuna's eyes. Not trust, not yet, but the beginning of something. A crack in the wall she had built around herself. Over the next few days, Yuna began to speak in small pieces. The translation software was imperfect, but the meaning came through clearly enough. She was Lirathi. Her people were healers and peacemakers. They had lived on a green world, with wide oceans and tall white trees. Then the Vakari came. They burned the cities. They took the strongest as workers, and the rest as tributes, living gifts to be handed out to allies and conquered peoples as signs of power. Yuna had been taken from her family when she was very young. She did not remember her mother's face. She had been kept in holding camps, moved between Vakari stations, trained to be silent, obedient, and useful. When she was chosen to be sent to a human, she thought she was being sent to die. She did not know what humans were. She only knew that the Vakari gave away things they no longer needed. Nari listened to all of this without interrupting. When Yuna finished, Nari simply said, "You are safe here." But she did not pull away when Nari gently touched her hand. Meanwhile, far above the surface of the earth, a very different kind of conversation was happening. Sol Orbital Station was the command center of the United Earth Defense Command. It hung in high orbit like a steel crown, bristling with communication arrays and docking ports. Inside its central chamber, the Joint Council had assembled for an emergency session. 24 representatives from every major human government sat in a wide circle. At the front stood Soren, and beside him, Gia, a young intelligence analyst with sharp eyes and a sharper mind. Gia had not slept in 40 hours. She had spent that time pulling together every piece of intelligence humanity had on the Vakari Dominion, and what she had found made her sick. The Vakari Dominion controls 37 star systems, Gia began, her voice clear and steady despite her exhaustion. They have conquered and enslaved at least 14 sentient species over the past 2 centuries. The Lirathi are one of them. They are used as labor, as servants, and as political currency, traded between Vakari commanders and offered as gifts to species the Dominion wants to influence. She paused and let that word hang in the air. Gifts. The delivery of a Lirathi individual to Captain Tejo was not random. It was a calculated political move. By offering a slave to a human citizen, the Vakari were testing us. If we accept, if we say nothing, do nothing, we become a partner in their system. We signal to the galaxy that humanity is willing to look the other way. Every species watching us will draw the same conclusion. The room was very quiet. And if we reject it, one of the council members asked, then we make an enemy of the most powerful military force in this region of space. That is the reality. Murmuring broke out around the room. Some voices were cautious. They spoke of diplomacy, of carefully worded protests, of avoiding conflict. Others were louder, angrier, but still uncertain. The Vakari fleet was enormous. Humanity had strength, but not enough to guarantee victory in a full war. Soren stepped forward. I have served with Tejo for 20 years. I trust his judgment. When he contacted me, he was not asking for advice. He was telling me what happened, and he expected us to act. I think we owe it to ourselves to at least consider what kind of species we want to be." More silence. Then the chairman of the council rose. Do-hwan was an older man, tall and lean, with white hair cut short and a face that showed nothing unless he wanted it to. He had led the council for 9 years. He was known for being patient, careful, and deliberate. He was also known for being completely unmovable once he made a decision. He stood at the center of the room and looked around at every face. "I have listened to the arguments," Do-hwan said. "I understand the risks. I understand the cost. But I want to be clear about something." He placed both hands on the table in front of him. "They did not send us a gift. They sent us a test. They wanted to know what we would do when we saw a girl in chains. They wanted to see if we would smile and say thank you. They wanted to know if we were the kind of species that could look at suffering and call it diplomacy." He paused. The room was completely still. "We are not that kind of species." The vote was not unanimous, but it was overwhelming. The council passed a formal resolution classifying the delivery of a sentient being as a slave to a human citizen as an act of hostility against the sovereignty, dignity, and moral standing of the United Earth government. The resolution authorized full military preparation and the mobilization of frontier defenses. That evening, a transmission was sent from Seoul Orbital Station to the Vakari Dominion's nearest relay point. It was written by Do-hwan himself. It was short. "To the Vakari Dominion High Command. The individual you delivered to our citizen has been granted full protected status under the laws of the United Earth government. She is not property. She is not a gift. She is a person, and she is under our protection. Any attempt to reclaim, harm, or enslave her, or any sentient being within our sphere of influence, will be considered a direct act of war against the human species. This is not a negotiation. This is a statement of who we are. You have been warned." The message traveled at the speed of light across the black emptiness of space. It would reach the Vakari in a matter of hours, and when it did, the galaxy would change. Back on Haenam 7, Taeho sat on the edge of his porch in the dark. Nari came out and sat beside him. From inside the house, they could hear the faint sound of Yuna sleeping, not the restless, frightened sleep of her first nights, but something a little deeper, a little more still. "The council voted," Taeho said. He had received the message from Soren minutes ago. "And?" Nari asked. "They chose correctly." Nari was quiet for a moment. "There will be a war. Yes, because of one girl." Taeho looked at her. "Because of what kind of people we want to be." Nari nodded. She did not argue. She understood. Some things were not about strategy or survival. Some things were about the line you drew in the dirt and refused to cross, no matter what waited on the other side. Above them, the stars burned cold and bright, indifferent to the decision that had just been made. But somewhere out there, a message was racing through space, carrying with it a simple truth that the Vakari Dominion had not expected. Humanity had looked at the test, and they had chosen the hard answer. The message from Earth reached the Vakari Dominion in 14 hours. It passed through 3 relay stations and was decoded by a junior communications officer aboard the Dominion's Central Command vessel, a massive warship called the Iron Throne that hung in orbit above the Vakari homeworld like a second moon. The officer read the message twice. Then he forwarded it to his superior. His superior read it once and sent it higher. Within an hour, it had reached the desk of Supreme Commander Varric, the military ruler of the Vakari Dominion. Varric read the message in his command chamber alone. When he finished, he set the screen down and was silent for a long time. Then, he began to laugh. It was not the laugh of a man who found something funny. It was the laugh of a man who could not believe what he was seeing. A minor species, one that had barely left its own star system 2 centuries ago, was threatening the Vakari Dominion. A Lirathi girl, worth less than the stasis pod she had been shipped in. Varric called his war council together within the hour. The chamber was filled with the Dominion's highest-ranking officers, scarred, decorated, and loyal. Varric showed them the message. "The humans have chosen poorly," Varric said. His voice was cold and final. "They were given an opportunity to join us as partners. Instead, they have insulted us. They have made demands. They have threatened war." He turned to his fleet commander. "Send a punitive force. 12 capital ships and full support. Hit their frontier colonies. Burn enough to make them understand the cost of their arrogance. Then offer terms." The fleet launched within 2 days. On Earth, the response was immediate. Soren had not waited for the Vakari to move. From the moment the Council had voted, the entire United Earth Defense Command had shifted into wartime posture. Ships that had been sitting in maintenance docks were rushed to readiness. Reserve officers were called back to duty. Supply lines were extended to the frontier colonies. But the real surprise was something most of the galaxy did not know about. For decades, while the Vakari and other empires had been fighting loud wars across the stars, humanity had been quietly building. Hidden shipyards in asteroid fields, research stations buried in the moons of gas giants, weapons programs that had never been announced, never tested in open space, never revealed to any foreign power. Earth had always known that the galaxy was dangerous, and Earth had always believed in being ready. Now those hidden shipyards opened their doors. The ships that came out were not the old patrol cruisers and cargo escorts that the Vakari had seen before. These were warships, fast, heavily armed, and designed from the ground up for one purpose. They were painted black, with no markings, no decorations, no names on their sides. They did not need names. Their presence was enough. Soren stood on the bridge of the command ship and watched the fleet form up around him. 200 warships. Not enough to match the Vakari's full navy, but more than enough to meet their punitive force. Gia appeared on the screen beside him. She had not left her station at Sol Orbital in days. "I have something," she said. "The Lirathi Communion. They still have a government in exile, hidden in a neutral system. I made contact. They did not believe me at first." "What did you tell them?" Soren asked. "I told them that a Lirathi girl was delivered to a human as a slave, and that the entire human species decided to go to war over it. They thought I was lying." Soren almost smiled. "What do they want?" "They have intelligence on the Vakari, fleet positions, supply routes, command structures. They also have medical ships and support vessels. They have been waiting for decades for someone to stand with them. They just never thought anyone would. Set up a meeting. Full diplomatic channel. I want their intelligence within 48 hours. On Hanem 7, the war had not yet arrived, but its shadow had fallen across everything. The colony's civilian population was being evacuated to safer systems. Transport ships came and went at all hours. The skies that had once been quiet were now full of engine trails. Tejo stood in his doorway and watched a military transport land in the field where the Vakari ship had once been. An officer stepped out and walked toward him. She handed him a sealed envelope. He opened it. Inside was a single sheet, a recall order. His rank had been reactivated. He was to report to the Frontier Command Ship within 72 hours. Tejo read it twice, folded it, and put it in his pocket. He found Yuna in the garden. She was sitting in the dirt, looking at a small green plant that had just begun to push through the soil. Nari was beside her, showing her how to press the earth down gently around the stem. Yuna's hands were still thin, still marked with fading scars, but they moved with care. She looked up when Tejo approached, and for the first time since she had arrived, she did not flinch. "You are leaving," Yuna said through the translator. It was not a question. She had seen the transport. Taeho knelt beside her. Yes. Because of me. Because of what was done to you. And because of what will be done to others if we do nothing. Yuna looked at him with those pale, glowing eyes. There was fear in them. Not of him, not anymore, but of the world that had taken everything from her and was now pulling away the first people who had shown her kindness. Will you come back? She asked. Taeho did not make promises he could not keep. He never had. But he put his hand gently on the top of her head, the way his own father had done when he was young, and said, I will try. He stood and looked at Nari. His sister's face was hard and steady. She was afraid too, but she would never show it, not in front of Yuna. Watch over her, Taeho said. You do not need to ask, Nari replied. Taeho went inside and opened the closet in the back room. His old uniform was there, sealed in a bag, untouched for years. He took it out and put it on. The fabric was stiff, but it fit. It had always fit. Some things did not change, no matter how long you tried to leave them behind. He walked out of the house, climbed into the transport, and did not look back. Not because he did not care, but because if he looked back, he might not leave. 3 days later, the Vakari punitive fleet arrived at the edge of human frontier space. 12 capital ships, each one larger than anything humanity had ever built, dropped out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. They expected to find scattered patrol ships and frightened colonies. Instead, they found the Earth frontier fleet waiting for them. 200 warships hung in a wide arc across the approach corridor, engines cold, weapons powered, completely silent. They had been there for 2 days, sitting in the dark, waiting. Behind them, the frontier colonies had been evacuated. There was nothing left to threaten, nothing left to burn. Only the fleet. The Vakari commander stared at his sensors for a long time. His officers looked at him, waiting for orders. He had expected resistance, a token force perhaps, a few old ships making a brave stand before surrendering. Not this. Not a wall of warships that had appeared from nowhere, organized and armed and showing no signs of retreat. On the human command ship, Soren sat in his chair and watched the Vakari fleet on his screen. Taeho stood beside him, arms crossed, his face as still as stone. They are hesitating, Taeho said. Good, Soren replied. Let them. The two fleets faced each other across 1,000 kilometers of empty space. Neither moved. The stars watched in silence. And somewhere behind the human line, in a small house on a quiet planet, a girl with silver skin knelt in a garden and pressed the earth gently around a small green plant, waiting for it to grow. The silence between the two fleets lasted 11 hours. Then the Vakari fired first. It was a single shot from the lead capital ship, a massive energy blast aimed at the center of the human formation. It was meant as a warning, a display of power, a final chance for the small species to scatter and beg. The shot tore through empty space and struck the outer hull of a human frigate on the left flank. The ship buckled, vented atmosphere from a dozen breaches, and went dark. 43 people died in the first second of the war. Taeho watched the frigate break apart on his tactical screen. He said nothing. His jaw tightened, but his hands did not move. Beside him, Soren was already giving orders. All ships, weapons free. Execute formation kite. Strike groups 1 through 4, begin your runs. Do not stop until they are bleeding. The human fleet moved like a single living thing. They did not charge forward in a straight line the way the Vakari expected. Instead, the formation split into dozens of smaller groups that fanned out in every direction, coming at the Vakari ships from angles that their targeting systems were not designed to track. Human ships were smaller and faster. They darted between the massive Vakari capital ships like birds around slow-moving giants, striking at weak points, engine clusters, shield generators, communication arrays, and pulling away before the heavy guns could lock on. Teiho commanded Strike Group 3. His group of 12 ships drove straight into the gap between two Vakari capital ships, so close that the enemy vessels could not fire on them without risking hitting each other. It was insane. It was exactly the kind of tactic that had made Teiho famous during his years in the service. The kind of move that only worked if every pilot trusted the commander completely and flew with perfect discipline. They did. Every ship held formation. Every shot hit its target. The two Vakari capital ships, caught in a crossfire of their own confusion, took heavy damage. One lost its main engines and began to drift. The other turned to flee and exposed its unshielded rear to a second human strike group that had been waiting in the dark. Within 3 hours, the Vakari punitive fleet had lost 4 of its 12 capital ships. The rest pulled back, regrouping at a safe distance. The human fleet did not chase them. They held their line, silent and steady, and waited. The Vakari commander sent a message back to the homeworld. It was short, and filled with something his superiors had never heard from him before. Uncertainty. Advise reinforcements. Supreme Commander Varric received the message and for the first time did not laugh. He sent a second fleet. 30 capital ships this time, with full support. Carriers, bombers, troop transports. Enough to overwhelm any frontier defense. Enough to end this. The war expanded. Over the following weeks, battles erupted across 4 star systems. The Vakari hit human colony worlds with bombardments from orbit. Cities burned. Farmland turned to glass. Thousands of civilians who had not been evacuated in time were killed. The images that reached Earth were terrible. Smoke rising from green hills, children being carried through rubble, entire towns reduced to ash. Humanity felt the pain. Every colony that burned, every ship that was lost, every name that appeared on the casualty lists, it all had weight. People on Earth watched the news feeds and asked themselves if this was worth it. If one girl, one principal, was worth this much blood. On Hainam 7, Yuna watched too. Nari had tried to keep the news away from her, but Yuta had found a screen and figured out how to use it. She sat on the floor of the kitchen and watched human cities burn, human soldiers die, human families weep over empty chairs. And she understood that this was happening because of what had been done to her. She stopped eating again. She stopped going to the garden. She sat in the corner of her room, knees pulled to her chest, and would not speak. Nari sat beside her and waited. She did not force conversation. She just sat there, close enough to touch, but not touching, until Yuna finally whispered through the translator, "They are dying because of me." Nari shook her head. "They are dying because of what the Vakari did, not because of you, never because of you. If I had not been sent here, then the Vakari would still be enslaving your people, and ours would be pretending not to see it. This is not your fault, Yuna. This is who we chose to be." Yuna looked at her with wet, shining eyes. She did not fully believe it, but she did not argue. And when Nari reached out her hand, Yuna took it. In the command center of the fleet, Gia was working on something that would change the war. She had been analyzing Vakari intelligence, data from the Larathi, intercepted communications, and her own observations, and she had found the crack in the Dominion's armor. The Vakari were powerful, but their power was not truly their own. Their ships were built by enslaved workers from conquered species. Their food was grown on slave plantations. Their supply lines were maintained by people who hated them, but had no choice. The entire Dominion was a machine that ran on fear and forced labor. If that labor stopped, if the slaves refused to work, even for a day, the machine would grind to a halt. Gia brought her findings to Soren and Teiho during a late-night briefing aboard the command ship. "We cannot beat them ship for ship," she said. "They have too many. But we do not have to. Their empire is built on people who want it to fall. We just have to give those people a reason to act." "How?" Soren asked. We broadcast a message in every language of every enslaved species. We tell them they are not alone. We tell them that someone is fighting, and we ask them to rise." Tejo looked at her for a long moment. "That is a lot of faith to put in people we have never met." "It is," Gia agreed, "but they have been waiting for this. Some of them have been waiting for generations. They just need to know that if they stand up, someone will stand with them." Soren approved the plan. The message was prepared in 14 different languages, encoded and broadcast on every frequency that could reach Vakari space. But they needed one more thing: a voice. A real voice from one of the enslaved species. Someone who could speak not as a strategist or a soldier, but as a person. Someone the Larathi and others would believe. They asked Yuna. Nari brought the request to her gently, without pressure. "You do not have to do this. No one will think less of you if you say no." Yuna was quiet for a long time. She looked out the window at the garden. The little plant she had been caring for had grown taller. It had small leaves now, reaching toward the sun. "I will do it," she said. They set up a recording device in the kitchen. Yuna sat at the table, her hands folded in front of her, and looked into the camera. She was still thin. She still had scars on her wrists, but her eyes were clear, and when she spoke, her voice did not shake. "My name is Yuna. I am Larathi. I was taken from my home when I was small. I was told I was nothing. I was given away like something broken and unwanted. I believed them. I believed I was nothing." She paused, and her eyes glistened, but she did not stop. "Then I was found by people who told me I was wrong. They looked at me and saw a person, not a gift, not a tool, a person. And they decided that what was done to me, what was done to all of us, was something they would not accept. They are fighting now, not for land, not for power, for us." Her voice grew stronger. "I am asking you to fight with them. I am asking you to believe that you are not nothing. Because you are not. You never were." The message was broadcast that night. It traveled across Vakari space at the speed of light, slipping through communication networks, bouncing between hidden receivers, reaching the ears of millions of enslaved beings on dozens of worlds. And within days, the fires began. On a Vakari shipyard world, Larathi workers stopped building warships and walked away from their stations. On a mining colony, slave laborers sealed the tunnels and refused to come out. On a farming planet, the harvest was left to rot in the fields. One by one, across the Dominion, the people who had been holding the empire together simply stopped. Supply lines broke. Shipments of fuel and ammunition never arrived. Factories went silent. The great machine of the Vakari Dominion, built on the backs of people it had called worthless, began to shake and groan and slow. And in the darkness of space, the human fleet watched and waited and prepared for the final push. The Vakari Dominion did not collapse in a single day. It crumbled slowly, the way a great wall crumbles when every stone inside it decides to pull itself free. The slave revolt spread faster than anyone had predicted. What began as quiet refusals, workers setting down their tools, laborers refusing to leave their quarters, turned into something larger. On the industrial world of Keth IV, Larathi engineers, who had built Vakari warships for decades, sealed the shipyard doors and destroyed the launch systems from the inside. On the agricultural colonies along the Dominion's southern border, entire populations walked off the fields and into the forests, taking their knowledge of the land with them and leaving nothing behind. The Vakari sent soldiers to put down the revolts, but every soldier sent to a slave world was a soldier not sent to fight humanity. Their forces were stretched thin, pulled in 100 directions at once, trying to hold together an empire that had suddenly decided it no longer wished to be held. And while the Dominion bled from within, the human fleet advanced. Tejo stood on the bridge of his ship and watched the star map change. What had been a wall of red, Vakari-controlled territory, was now dotted with pockets of blue and white. Liberated worlds, systems where the enslaved had risen and won, or where Vakari garrisons had simply abandoned their posts and fled. The coalition that Gia had dreamed of was becoming real, not just the Larathi, but a dozen other species, each one stepping forward for the first time in generations. They were not all fighters. Many of them had never held a weapon, but they sent what they could. The Larathi sent medical ships, beautiful white vessels that moved through the battle zones like calm hands, picking up the wounded from both sides. A species called the Tereni, small and quiet, had been forced to serve as navigators on Vakari ships. Now they shared every route, every shortcut, every hidden passage through Vakari space. Another species, the Bahan, who had been used as miners, offered raw materials and fuel from the mines they had liberated. The coalition fleet grew. It was not a pretty formation. Human warships flew alongside Larathi medical cruisers, and repurposed Vakari cargo ships, crewed by freed slaves. They did not match. They did not move with the same rhythm, but they moved together, and that was enough. Soren commanded the combined fleet from the bridge of the human flagship. Ja stood at his side, managing communications between species that had never spoken to each other before. It was chaos, but it was the kind of chaos that had a direction. Forward, always forward, toward the heart of the Dominion. The final battle happened above the Vakari homeworld. The Dominion had pulled back everything it had left, its remaining capital ships, its personal guard fleet, every vessel that could still fly. They formed a defensive ring around the planet, bristling with weapons, waiting for the attack. Tejo led the vanguard. His strike group, now made up of human ships, 2 Larathi cruisers, and a squadron of Tereni scout vessels, was the first to engage. The fighting was brutal. Vakari ships were damaged, desperate, and dangerous. They fought with the fury of a wounded animal, throwing everything they had at the incoming fleet. Ships burned on both sides. Explosions lit up the darkness of space like small suns, being born and dying in seconds. Tejo lost 3 ships in the first hour. He watched their signals disappear from his screen, one by one, and forced himself to keep giving orders. He had carried this weight before. It never got lighter. But the Vakari line was breaking. With every hour, more of their ships went silent. Some destroyed, some crippled, and some simply shutting down as their enslaved crews mutinied from the inside. The great war machine of the Dominion was eating itself. By the end of the second day, it was over. Supreme Commander Varric sat alone in his command chamber, aboard the Iron Throne. His fleet was shattered. His empire was in pieces. The species he had conquered were free, and the species he had dismissed as insignificant was parked in orbit above his world, with enough firepower to turn his cities to dust. He sent a message requesting terms. Dohwan received the message on Sol Orbital Station. He read it once, set it down, and spent a long time looking out the window at the earth below, blue and green and turning slowly in the light. Then he sat down and wrote his response. The terms were not gentle. Every enslaved being in Vakari territory was to be released immediately, without condition. The Vakari military command structure was to be dissolved. All weapons above defensive grade were to be surrendered to the coalition. Reparations, real, meaningful reparations, were to be paid to every species the Dominion had conquered, and Vakari territory would be governed by an interspecies council until free elections could be held on every world. The Vakari ambassador who received the terms called them humiliating. He said that no species in the history of the galaxy had ever been subjected to such demands. He said it was unjust. Do-won looked at him across the negotiation table and said, "You sent a girl in chains to our doorstep and called it a gift. You do not get to talk to us about justice." The Vicari signed the terms. They had no choice. The war was over. The weeks that followed were strange and difficult. Liberation was not simple. Worlds that had been enslaved for generations did not know how to govern themselves overnight. There were shortages, confusion, and fear. The coalition held together, but it was fragile, held in place by shared exhaustion and the memory of what they had all been through. Humanity helped where it could. Engineers were sent to rebuild infrastructure. Medical teams went to the worst-hit worlds. Diplomats worked around the clock to keep the new interspecies council from falling apart. It was messy, imperfect work, and it would take years. But it had begun, and that was something. Taeho came home to Haenam 7 on a quiet morning in early spring. The colony had been repaired. The evacuated families had returned, the fields were green again, and the sky was empty of warships for the first time in months. He walked from the landing pad to his house along the dirt road, carrying nothing but a small bag. His uniform was folded inside it. He did not plan to wear it again. Nari was standing on the porch when he arrived. She looked older, thinner, more tired, but her eyes were warm, and she smiled when she saw him. "You are late," she said. "There was a lot to do," he replied. Then the door behind Nari opened, and Yuna stepped out. She had changed, or maybe she just stood straighter. Her silver skin was healthier, no longer the pale gray of someone who had not seen sunlight in years. Her hair was clean and brushed, tied back with a simple ribbon. She was wearing human clothes, a soft blue shirt and brown pants that were slightly too big for her. And on her feet were garden shoes caked with dirt. But the biggest change was in her face. The emptiness that had been there when Taeho first found her in the stasis pod, that hollow, broken look of a person who had stopped expecting anything good, was gone. In its place was something alive, something that looked like hope, or maybe just the beginning of it. She saw Taeho and ran to him, not in fear, not in desperation. She ran the way a person runs towards someone they trust, someone they have been waiting for, someone they are glad to see. She threw her arms around him and held on tight, and Taeho, who had held steady through battles and bombardments and war councils where the fate of species was decided, felt his composure crack for the first time. He put his arms around her and closed his eyes. "Thank you," Yuna said. Her Korean was careful but clear. She had been practicing. "Thank you for seeing me." Taeho knelt so that he was level with her. He put a hand on her shoulder and looked at her, really looked at her, the way he had on that first night, when she was broken and shaking, and he was just a tired man in a garden. "You were never a gift," he said. "You were a person. That is all that ever mattered." Yuna smiled. It was small and fragile and not yet fully formed, like a plant that had just broken through the soil. But it was real. That evening, the three of them sat on the porch together and watched the sun go down behind the hills of Haenam 7. Yuna sat between them, with a blanket over her knees, and for the first time she talked about the future, about wanting to learn medicine like Nari, about wanting to help rebuild her world, about a garden she wanted to grow that would have plants from both Earth and Lirath. She talked about the future as if she believed she had one. And far away, across the galaxy, in the halls of power and the quiet rooms of 100 different species, the story was told and retold. A species called humanity, small, young, unremarkable by galactic standards, had been given a test. A powerful empire had sent them a frightened girl in chains and waited to see what they would do. They went to war, not for territory, not for resources, not for revenge. for a principle so simple that a child could understand it. No person is a gift. No life is a thing to be given away. Other empires heard the story and took note. Some were inspired. Some were afraid. But all of them understood the same truth, that there was a species in the galaxy now that drew lines in the dirt, and when they drew them, they meant it. The Vicari had wanted to know what kind of species humanity was. Now the galaxy had its answer.